This video deals with very simple equations or formulas. What we're going to do is approach this from several different angles. The first one is I want to show you where you find these particular formulas, and we're going to create them by hand as well. So the first thing is we're on the Home tab at the moment. And across on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the symbol epsilon. And this is in the category called editing. Now, we can use this auto sum in a sense, or we can use the drop-down arrow and choose a variety of different used frequently types of formula. One of them happens to be average, the other one is counting the values that are in there, also the largest value maximum, and the minimum value, in other words, the smallest value within a list. So we're going to take a look at each one of these. This is one way of finding this. The second approach is to use this particular symbol, which is f of x here. It's called insert a function. If I click on that, it will open up this dialog box. And again, you'll see the most recently used. If this is not what comes up, just choose it from the drop-down menu. But in most cases, these are the most common types of formula that you'll use most frequently. Now, we'll go through this in a moment. I'm just going to cancel that for a moment. And I'm also going to go across here to formula. Now, when I click on formula, you'll notice there's your epsilon again, auto sum. And I could click on that, or I can use the drop down and choose one of these. You'll also notice more functions are here, and that's opening up that dialog box with all the different functions. We also have insert function here as well, so I could click here and get that dialog box again. Now, above this, you'll also see there are categories of different types of formula, and each one of these equations, some of them for text, some of them for Boolean logic or other types of logic, and financial types, and also a variety of other ones for dates and times, etc. When we use this dialog box, it allows us to see not only the type of formula, and there are many formulas. By the way, there are hundreds and hundreds of them. We can choose from a variety of different categories. But when we actually choose one of these, you'll see below it there's a description. It tells you exactly what it is looking at. Now, I'm going to throw a little bit of information in here, and I want you to think about this and write it down as well. When you have two cells and you have a colon in between, it indicates that it is a range of numbers. So it is from the first cell to the last cell. So if these cells are totally separate, and I'll show you this in a moment, then it means it's a range. If there is a comma between two cells within a formula, it means that they're independent of one another, but they are being either added together or another function is taking place. Now, formulas can be very complex. These are very elementary, very simplistic. Sometimes you can have formulas that might be a yard long. That might seem a little odd, but one of the beauties about this product is you can copy formulas, so create it once and just keep copying it. So that's one of the nice things about it. We're going to choose sum. I've already selected this particular cell down here, A7. But I also want you to notice something. Whenever there is a formula or a function, there will always be an equal sign first. That tells Excel that what is about to follow is an operation that must take place. In other words, it has a sequential order. Now, I shouldn't actually say sequential because there are some caveats in there as well. However, for our sake, that's enough. I'm going to choose sum. This is a summation. This is adding numbers together. And you can see the little syntax below here, which is showing us what it will look like. Within brackets will always be what we want to do. We call this the argument. So it's going to sum whatever is in between these brackets. And by having a comma, It means add the first number to the second number. So I'm going to click OK. And there it is. It's coming up. Now, unfortunately, it's also kind of moved it a little bit on me. There we go. So the formula has gone all the way up this column to figure out where it began. It began at A1 and it completed itself at A6. Well, there's A6, and that was the last number in that column. The only thing that can interrupt this process is an empty cell. If there was an empty cell, let's say in A2, then it would not see A1. It would assume that A3 would be the last one. So here we have A1, and there's my colon, so that tells me everything in between. And it tells me that if I add up all those numbers from A1 to A6, it will come up to 135. So this is kind of nice about using this particular interface. This dialog box is going to tell me how much it is before I even commit myself to accepting it. So I'm going to accept it. And there it is, 135. Now, also, I'm just going to zoom it back a little bit so we can see the whole thing. There we go. So now we can see all of them. Let me just a little bit more. There we go. If I click on this, inside you can see that the number is here, that it added it up. But in the formula bar, it shows me the actual formula within that cell. So it's showing me what's behind it, behind the solution. However, if I click in the formula bar, it will also show me where the data comes from. So if I click here, you'll see everything is now encapsulated and it's selected. And it's also converted this cell back into a formula. So I'm just going to open that up a little bit. Let's just open this up so we can actually see this more clearly. There we go. So now we can see the formula inside, and you can also see where the data is coming from. Okay. Now press OK, and I'm going to go to the second column for a moment. So I'm just going to make this smaller again, and I'm going to come to the second column, B. Now in B7, I'm going to put a different formula. So this time in AutoSum, we also have that we can take an average. What the average is going to do is look at that entire column of numbers, and it's going to find the one in the middle. So which is the middle value? So the average of the entire column. And if I click on it, it shows me the calculation. It's showing me that colon again, which means it's from B2 all the way to B6. That's not exactly what I want. I want it to go all the way to B1. But notice something? Remember what I just said a moment ago about an empty cell? The moment it finds an empty cell, it will not include it. Okay, so I'm simply going to change that that 2 to a 1, because I do want it to include it, because I'm going to type something in there in a moment to change the value. And now when I press enter, it will do an average, and it says the average value of all these values is 22. So 22 is in the middle somewhere. However, if I go up to 1, so B1, and I put in, let's say, a value a little bit different. Let's say I put in 11, and I accept that value, you notice that the average is now changed, because 22 is no longer in the middle. It's now 20 in the middle. And of course, I can change this decimal place so it doesn't show it, because it is under 5 and therefore it doesn't round it up. So I could change the 11 again, and I could put in, let's say, 23. Now it's 22, but it's not quite 22. It's a little higher than 22, simply because it's no longer directly in the middle. So average is a great function. We often use it when we want to find what is the average value of something. Now we have the same situation in C, so we know that at least C1 will not be chosen. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put in another formula. So C7, I'm going to choose count. So this time, again, I'm going to change the 2 to a 1 because I'd like it to include that. Now there is another way of doing this, but this is the simplest approach for us right now. And now it's selected even the empty. I'll click OK, and it tells me there are actually 5 here. Well, let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's right. And the sixth one is actually empty. So let's change that. Let's put a number in here. I'll put in 12. I'll accept the value, and that should change our 5 to a 6. And there it is. It's now a 6. So all count does is give us how many actual numbers exist, or how many rows are occupied with a number. Now there are different kinds of count. Some of them count empty spaces. Some of them count only alphabetical characters. And some of them just numbers. And some of them other variations entirely. Specifics. So there are different variations. Now I'm going to remove each one of these formulas. And we're going to use something else for a moment. Again, these are only simple. So I'm going to click once again in A7, and I'm going to look for the largest value. So to do that, I'll choose maximum. I'll let it choose the entire column. I'll click OK. There we now have that the largest value is actually 31. Well, I can see by looking at this column that 31 is the largest value. Now, if we had a giant column, it would be difficult because you'd have to go looking for it. But it's easier for Excel to do it for you. Beside that, I'm going to look for the smallest value. Now, if I look very carefully, I can see that 12 is definitely the smallest. So we'll know for sure if it works by clicking on minimum, clicking OK because it has accepted, and yes, it is. 12 is the smallest value, and that's exactly what it found for the smallest, the minimum value within that column. Excuse me. Within that column. So now I'm going to take a look at the third column. Now, instead of using one of these or some other function entirely, I'm going to type it in. And the easiest approach to do this is simply to put in an equal sign. Now, I'm not going to use sum. I could type it in. I'm actually going to use the comma. So I'm going to click on the first cell. So let's go up to the first cell. I'm going to click on it. And now I have C1. I'm going to put a plus symbol. I'm going to click on the second one. I'm going to put a plus symbol. I'm going to click on the next one. I'm going to put a plus symbol. I'm going to click on the next one. You get the idea. I'm just simply adding them together so that all of these are actually listed here. They're all plus, 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 plus. And if I press enter, it adds all of the 6 values up. Remember, there is a 1 up there. It's just hiding. So let me just zoom back a little bit. There we go. So now we can see that all of them are there, and I can see them. If I click inside that formula bar, it's going to show me where the data comes from. But this time, instead of one giant color, because it was arranged before, this time it shows me each one as a separate color. It's telling me that each one of them is separate, and I'm adding them together.